How INFPs see the 16 personalities. ESTPs. INFPs see ESTPs as punchy and pushy in places that they don't want to budge. I've described both INFPs and INTPs in the past as passive. That isn't quite the right word, really, but it does capture a certain vibe. Some people like to react and adapt to the outside world. In a way, they like to be pushed around by it, or to become one with it. The INFP prefers to have a separation between them and the external world. They like to move at their own pace and speed, on their own time. When they encounter situations that force them to do things, it can feel very uncomfortable indeed. One of the worst ways this shows up is when another person is that pushy presence. ESTPs are very much this way. SE is the blind spot of INFPs. It's something they don't value much, rarely use, and are not good with. They will feel like the ESTP is unendingly trying to push them around. This won't be intentional on the part of the ESTP, they'll just be being themselves. The ESTP also has blind spot FI, which is the dominant function of the INFP. So ESTPs won't really get the INFP naturally. The natural pushiness of the ESTP will often rub INFPs up the wrong way. Clashes between these two types is kind of like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. INFPs don't budge when they don't want to. INFPs will see ESTPs as people who speak an entirely different language. ENFJs. INFPs see ENFJs as the outward-facing flip side of the coin. On a number of occasions, there have been ENFJs who I initially thought were INFPs. That is a bit weird, I know, but there are overlaps. These types have the same kinds of functions, feeling, intuition, sensing, and thinking, in the same order, but flipped, in terms of whether they are introverted or extroverted. Both the ENFJ and INFP are deeply capable, empathetic energizers. They do it in different ways with different styles, but they both do it. So if you catch an INFP in a high energy, social mood, they can look very much like an ENFJ. The ENFJ is the shadow type of the INFP. People speculate that when someone is in an unhealthy state, they go into their shadow. So there might be times when INFPs come across like unhealthy ENFJs. I imagine a situation where an INFP is forced to be ultra-social for long periods of time. Maybe it's because of their work life or their family situation. Regarding the latter, if there are difficult or unpleasant dynamics within their family, they might feel somewhat compelled to take up the role of proactive peacemaker, trying to keep the bridges unburned and bonds unbroken. In such times, they'd be very ENFJ-like, but it wouldn't feel natural to them. They'd feel unfairly bound by it, and in their view, playing politics and denying authenticity. Both of these types can get along great. That shared brilliance they both have, with both kinds of intuition, serves them well, and makes their interactions shimmer with that ideational play. Conversations between them can be quite creatively electric because of that. ENTPs. INFPs see ENTPs as experimental ships who sometimes need an ethical anchor. Ethical is a bit over the top as a word, but let's use that for now. One word that I associate with FI is identity. Your values, beliefs, and principles, what you stand for, characterize who you are as a person. Logical reasoning, on the other hand, is impersonal. Although it rarely works out this way, especially given the contentious nature of discourse these days, at least in theory, two people should converge on the same answer by following the same logic. ENTPs are fluid people. They embrace changeability and experimentation. Letting go of the past and moving on is not a bad thing or a sad thing to them, not even bittersweet for the most part. But because of this trait, in certain ways, they are untethered. They don't always know what they stand for, because they often think that standing for something at the expense of open-mindedness is the most foolish mistake possible. INFPs are great with NE, which is the dominant function of ENTPs, so they understand that need for change of the ENTP. But INFPs have FI as their main function, which is the blind spot of the ENTP. So INFPs see ENTPs as people who they can match on their strengths and also help with their weaknesses. ENTJs. INFPs see ENTJs as intriguing opposites who can guide each other. ENTJs are often assertive, confident, and decisive. They push forward in life and make things happen through force of will alone, if need be. That is actually pretty alluring to INFPs, who can struggle with inertia and passivity. INFPs see many possible paths in life and become torn between what might work in a cold, detached, pragmatic sense and what they might actually want, even if it's not realistic. ENTJs seem to be able to make whatever they want happen. However, ENTJs don't always know what they want. They will have times where their FI creeps up on them. Suddenly, questions like, do I really want this lifestyle or career path? Or, am I actually finding my choices meaningful in life? Start to appear in their minds. This is where people like INFPs can be a great advisor and guide to ENTJs. Because they have that shared reverence for their intuitive functions, both types are good at both kinds of intuition, it means that ENTJs, when they're in the right headspace for it, aren't going to see the INFP suggestions as silly or out there. They will get them. So INFPs and ENTJs can guide each other in the realm of decision making. It simply depends on the kinds of decisions that are being made. ISFPs. INFPs see ISFPs as their neighbours on the outskirts of everything. INFPs see ISFPs as kindred spirits with a tangible twist. They are similar enough to understand each other, but different enough to challenge each other. Both types value ideas, and both types can get lost, but ISFPs tend to get lost by choice, whereas INFPs don't always have a say in the matter. ISFPs are the kinds of people to run away from home, whereas INFPs are the kinds of people who forget the way home. INFPs have blind spot SE. It's a weakness, something they don't value. For ISFPs, that blind spot function is NE. As you can see, both types have as a blind spot something that is a strength for the other. When possessed by an impulse, an INFP might explore that ideationally. They might seek out philosophies, fictional characters, belief systems, mindsets, and so on, to see which ones they resonate with, which ones line up with that desire, or impulse, or value. ISFPs are more likely to take action based on that impulse. For this reason, ISFPs will come across as far more impulsive than INFPs. When inspired, INFPs often move inwards. Their inner world is going crazy. When ISFPs are inspired, they often move outwards and just go conventionally crazy. INFPs see ISFPs as people whose hearts beat to the same rebellious rhythm, but seek out their individualism through different methods and means. ESFPs. INFPs see ESFPs as the bridge between authenticity and action. INFPs know who they are, but they don't always know what to do with that. ESFPs kind of know both. For this reason, ESFPs can be people who lead INFPs by example. Because INFPs can become stuck in ruts, detached, and in their own worlds on occasion, ESFPs are astonishing vehicles for them to embrace the sensory richness the world has to offer. There is a sense of the ESFP taking the INFP under their wing, or rather, taking them on a wild ride. The flip side of this is the INFP feeling like they're being somewhat forced by the ESFP, or seen as people who aren't moving fast enough or taking action enough. The ESFP nature can be severely overwhelming to the INFP if they aren't careful. Usually though, INFPs will view ESFPs as people who inspire movement and momentum in life, and ignite them to actually live their values. ENFPs. INFPs see ENFPs as them, but on fast forward. The INFP and ENFP are very similar types, in large part because ENFPs are ambiverted so often. INFPs are quite paradoxical. They have that deeply changeable side, yet an entirely immovable side too. The ENFP is more amorphous because NE is so prized and SI is repressed by it. There is a constant pursuit of the new and novel that drives them, even in small ways. So INFPs are more rigid and ENFPs are more fluid. Their fluidity shows up as they iterate through different ideas, mindsets, philosophies, approaches to life, and so on. INFPs are much slower to do these things, but they integrate parts of those things into themselves much more. I think this speed differential is evident in real time too. If you're watching both of them interact with other people, ENFPs are a mile a minute, whereas INFPs are quite energy conserving. INFPs see ENFPs as spontaneous firecrackers, with a similar nature to their own, albeit with the dials turned up to maximum weirdness. INFPs. INFPs see INFPs as seekers searching for themselves. Identity is a major preoccupation of the INFP type. That also dovetails nicely with the fact that INFPs are often type 4s in the Enneagram system. Some types don't really care about the who am I kinds of questions. They might even reject the premise of them. For the INFP, it's a big deal though. In both directions, be that absorbing something or producing something, INFPs want that spark of authentic resonance with a thing. That is the only possible path to passion for them. It's often said of them that they feel misunderstood, but sometimes it's just not understood. By them even. INFPs are out with treasure maps, on journeys to find that X that marks a spot that resides within them. Their searches are often fruitful, although they can find themselves in the strangest of places. ISTJs. INFPs see ISTJs as people of similar spinal fortitude. Perhaps a controversial statement, these two types can mistype as each other. They have this introverted combo of functions that act like a spine. These are FI and SI in either order. There is a certain uncompromising quality to this backbone of functions. It's like a double-locked door, consisting of two separate ways of firmly believing or upholding something. INFPs have any higher, so they're more changeable, which is kind of confusing, actually. ISTJs have that as an inferior function, so they'll come across as more conventionally inflexible. INFPs are resolute in their resistance of external force and influence. ISTJs are also unwavering in a similar way, but tend to impose their will on the external world. An INFP might say, I believe in this thing, and here's a bunch of ideas to explain why. An ISTJ might say, I believe in this thing, and here's a bunch of systematic things you can implement that also allow you to measure and prove that this approach is better. INFPs aren't structured with themselves, nor do they impose structure externally that much either. This is one reason why people are really caught off guard when the quiet, unassuming person expresses an opinion with immense force, seemingly out of nowhere. In reality, that has always been there, they just didn't really feel the need to draw attention to it before. So INFPs see ISTJs as fellow people of principle, similarly rigid in both good and bad ways, but more regimented. ESTJs. INFPs see ESTJs as the pure pragmatists that also lurk within their own nature. When comparing opposite types, there is a dichotomy. In this case, INFPs are people who know what they stand for, but struggle to reconcile that with the various systems, structures, and institutions in society. ESTJs are people who can navigate basically any system by meeting metrics and perfecting procedures. They can be machine-like in this way. Opposite type relationships are thought to be, potentially, very good. There is the possibility of each type compensating for the other's weakness, and, during this process, encouraging the other type to grow and develop those weaker functions. INFPs are masters of internal exploration, whereas ESTJs are masters of external implementation. If they can make that a complementary cycle where each feeds into the other, then magical things can happen. Both types are unified by a strong sense of duty and responsibility, albeit in different ways, so they can get on the same page with each other. INFPs see ESTJs as people who are cold-hearted machines if they're not being driven by principle, or people who can do what sometimes seems like the impossible, make ideals real. INTPs. INFPs see INTPs as fellow, unassuming sages. Being in a room with an INFP and INTP is like sitting with two Yodas of a different flavour. They are both IP types, both introverts, both have NE and SI as their middle functions, both have SE as a blind spot, and beyond that, come across as very similar. They are both calm, often reserved, insightful, quirky, and eccentric. Contrary to many of the descriptions, INFPs aren't overtly or overly emotional. They can be quite stoic, in fact, and INTPs aren't the robots they are made out to be either. If you get them both together and just observe them talking, you'll see how similar they are. That is easier said than done though, since they will almost always be the ones observing and analysing you. Even their dominant functions of FI and TI are similar in nature. They are both making judgments about the world all the time, in different ways. That strange combination of, I suppose, confidence and self-assurance in their views, plus that allegiance and respect for open-mindedness, is what makes them wise, in my view. They are confident enough to speak their mind, but never arrogant enough to preach. So INFPs will see INTPs, quite simply, as people very similar to them. ESFJs. INFPs see ESFJs as being like teachers who pick them, even though they didn't put their hand up. I can see INFPs loving the comfort and coziness that ESFJs can wrap people up in. If they lived in the same house, for example, the INFP would no doubt find themselves in a beautiful nest. I think that INFPs respect what ESFJs do and are capable of, especially with people, but they don't always want to be a part of it. INFPs have no problem with ESFJs unless, or until, they try to force them out of their shell too much. Sometimes ESFJs, who might be the most extroverted type, have trouble understanding introverts. To them, it might seem like the introvert is in a bad mood or somehow off in an inexplicable way. This will be the main source of tension between them. If that is avoided, then INFPs will see ESFJs as people who can bring them seamlessly into the social realm and provide a comfortable, cozy, and often healthy environment for them. INTJs. INFPs see INTJs as fellow imaginative visionaries, able to construct complex worlds and influence others with their unique perspectives. There have been a few occasions where I've seen authors who half the time were typed as an INFP and the other half INTJ, and I still don't know their type for sure. Types overlap in many bizarre ways. In this case, it's a product of being highly intuitive and highly driven by personal values. I can't think of a better phrase for it, but they have the quality of world builders to me. I think of people like Tolkien or George R.R. Martin, people who just follow the things they like and flesh out worlds with depth and breadth. You get the sense that they're not even caring about what people will think of it, which, ironically, with art, often results in people loving the originality of what's created. That ability to deep dive into their own ideas and imaginations and soak through their creations and insights with that original, individual flavour is something that characterises them. Because of that deep, burning, personal motivation they have, they are both unburdened by the constraints of conventionality. ISTPs. INFPs see ISTPs as appealingly self-assured, but may struggle with their emotional reluctance. The INFP type is synonymous with freedom to me. The ISTP embodies a certain kind of freedom. It's an independence of spirit, a self-sufficiency, an I can do it myself, or I don't need you vibe. The INFP will love that about them. It speaks to their own nature in a deep way. However, when they interact with each other, there can be clashes. The ISTP has NE as a blind spot, and TI as a dominant function, so they might just not get INFPs. They might see them as impractical and lacking in a certain kind of go-getting, action-oriented, and detached problem-solving mindset. INFPs might struggle to feel connected with the ISTP, who are notoriously reluctant to engage in purely emotional exchanges that have no benefit beyond that. So I think the INFP will see the ISTP as someone they admire, but at a distance, because up-close and personal relationships won't always be straightforward with them. ISFJ. INFPs see ISFJs like the wise old oak tree whose shade they can sit and read a book in. Much of the ESFJ section applies to the ISFJ as well, but a big difference is that the ISFJ is an introvert. That changes how they'll get along in quite a big way. It alters the dynamic. Whenever I've seen ISFJs in Flesh World, they rarely seem overwhelmed or thrown off by social interaction. Maybe it's because of their grounded nature, but they can also tolerate massive amounts of alone time, so there won't be any clash in this area between them. The INFP will rarely feel put upon by them. They'll both resonate with that slow pace of life, taking their time, building their routines and habits, and gladly indulging in their creature comforts. It is possible that the ISFJ will find the INFP, really weird, but often that won't be a problem. I have seen ISFJs take a protective approach to INFPs. Well, ISFJs take a protective approach to almost anyone they like, and INFPs have absolutely no problem with that at all. INFJs. INFPs see INFJs as having similar means to a different end. The INFJ and INFP are very alike in their vibe and their style. It is almost like they take the same path to a different destination. They are both introverts and NF types, and both struggle with SE and TE. Both tend to be kind of gentle, or to say it the other way around, they're rarely bombastic or domineering. Both bring about connections in a very human way. They are interested in people. The INFP is after that real, genuine, and raw connection, and beyond that, well, they don't really want anything beyond that. The INFJ is after strong relationships that work and are functional. They can bend in favour of that aim without much of a thought. In that way, compromise doesn't feel like compromise to them. The INFP will be sensitive to any kind of compromise. They are very vigilant for that. INFPs are more individual and INFJs more relational. I wouldn't say that it's apparent right away, but given enough time observing them, you'll see it more blatantly. So there's a superficial similarity between them, but big differences underneath. If you have fingers, please use them to click subscribe. And if you don't have fingers, please use another limb or appendage.